spookerific review, we're going to be continuing our looks at the McFarlane Toys Clive Barker Tortured Souls Series 2, The Fallen. This is Camille Noire. Camille Noire is approximately 7 inches tall. If you count the tops of her wings, she's closer to about 7.5 inches tall. She includes a much needed display stand. She's in fact one of the only few figures that come with a display stand, because on her own you could get her to stand, but she is very top heavy because really the wings add so much additional back heaviness to her. It's just enough, and the way that she's standing, just enough for her to not stand. She'll topple over to the side. So make sure you do use the display stand. You certainly do not want to lose this if you want to be displaying this particular figure. Speaking of this figure, what a fantastic yet gruesome looking sight to be seen here. This is kind of taking a little bit more back to the scope of more of a Cenobite sort of feel that I didn't necessarily get with the initial figure that we looked at. She's a very grotesque, yet somehow still pretty looking representation here in a tortured soul. Her face, let's zoom in and have a look at her face first, is very angelic. In fact, the figure as a whole very much is an angelic looking figure. I'll just move the arms out of the way here. I do think the face is quite pretty in its garish, gruesome representation. I do dig the fact that she's got almost like a quasi-halo represented here with a buzzsaw blade running through her head. You can see the back portion of it right there. The back of the head is not removable. I thought it might have actually been able to, where you could have popped the back dome of the head off and see the exposed brain, but I can't seem to remove it. I would not probably say that it is something that is a removable appliance. It does look like it wants to move, but I think it's more so just the fact that the blade rotates, which is a very clever and yet still gruesome way to have the figures, you know, a little bit of a novelty gimmick, so to speak there. You can see that there's some blood. Of course there would be blood across the blades of the saw blade, the buzzsaw blade, because it is, after all, making use of itself. It's running through something, after all. And then again, she's kind of got, it looks almost like a lingerie sort of outfit with some fingerless gloves. And this is, you know, surprisingly, as gross as the wings might be, which we'll talk about in a second, I'm actually more disturbed by the presentation of her feet. You can see, or hopefully there you go, you can see it. She's wearing these very elongated sort of high heels. But if you would imagine what her feet would look like inside of that, maybe to not this necessarily this extreme, but there are, of course, very much horror stories of ways that women would distort their bodies for the sense of beauty. I don't know if women would have gone to this extreme, but I have certainly seen images where women have put themselves in very, very small feet, small shoes, or, you know, shoes that are, you know, not naturally shaped. So surprisingly, that bothers me more so than the wings themselves. Looks like she's got a couple of like little protrusions sticking out from her legs here. She almost kind of reminds me, I don't know why, but kind of reminds me of like a marionette doll, which I don't really know where I'm getting that vibe from. It just, more so angel, yes, because obviously with the big noticeable wings here. And let's discuss the wings. The wings themselves look like they are stretched pieces of her skin. Of course, ripped away from the back of her body here, and I'm assuming to be stretched. That still seems like an awful lot of skin coming from really a small area such as this to have been able to fan out and create wings like this. I'm no scientist, I'm no surgeon at all where I would be able to say yes, 100%, you could get that much skin from one's back. But it is very gruesome. And it is also slightly translucent as well. When you get the figure out of packaging, I believe it's actually this side, it might be this side. We'll go with this side. One side is pegged in already with the wing, and the figure is kind of packaged. Well, you saw the beginning of the review. The figure, I think, is like this. This other wing and this other construct here, you have to peg in and then feed the fleshed portions through the framed apparatus here. Now, I could get a couple of these in. There's a couple of these I still couldn't peg in for fear that this is still, after all, plastic. It ain't metal, so it could potentially have broken. So I'll still try to feed those individual looplets through the hooks to get the finished final results. But again, it's very gruesome in a very angelic sort of way. The rest of her outfit, like I said, is only kind of like lingerie, and then she's got a very long skirt. Pretty, but again, very, very creepy. She does have some posability, or some aspects of the framework here that do hinge. They do swivel. These little kind of hook protrusions. I guess you could kind of just have them out this way. I mean, there's a couple different ways you could do them. Going with the flow, I would probably just have them continue on like this, but I guess you could probably have them angled upward as well if you want. The same thing on the other side. This little section here can hinge back and forth, and I would probably just continue it on this way. Some indication that this may not be her skin is the sight of several stitchings stitched together here. Possibly not just her skin has been used to create this, you know, wing-like contraption on her back. So again, maybe it's not all her skin. Maybe it's some of her skin, and it's other skin been brought to it by other victims as well. It doesn't really have a lot in the way of coloring. It keeps to a very pale skin tone. Again, resonates quite well for it being a decayed corpse, so to speak. Basically just not resurrected, but brought to life and continued its journey along. Articulation on this one is very limited. In fact, there's really very little articulation at all. She does have head articulation, and I keep moving this. I'm wondering if this does rotate. Let's see here. The last thing I would want to do is see, it looks like the back of the head does swivel. I don't suspect it can come off completely. Maybe it does. It looks like it just kind of hinges back and forth. This, of course, rotates. We've already discussed that. Neck articulation, arm articulation. Nothing in the bicep area, but she does have some articulation in the hands. Same thing with this one here. How to display this figure? I mean, you could kind of have her arms up, sort of thing. I mean, other than that, you can have the arms out, but it almost looks like she should be doing something. More importantly, with this hand, I thought at one point that her hand would sit to her side, but no, that not be the case. So probably would just end up having them slightly kind of like that, very angelic. No waist articulation. She seems, and this is the laughable part, she seems to have leg articulation, but what would you really do with the legs? They're straight, for starters, and to have the hinge right there, it serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. There's nothing really you can actually do with the figure, as we've already discussed. Oh, she does stand. Okay, I was going to say she does stand, but again, making use of the display stand, especially for the fact that the wings would be a very fragile back part of the figure. You would not want to have the figure topple backward and land on these wings. These wings obviously would probably snap over the force of having the figure fall, and all the more reason I would still continue, despite the fact that I was very successful and surprised by that, I would still keep the display stand very much rooted to the underside of her feet here. This figure very much, again, reads closer to something like I would see in a Cenobite or Hellraiser movie. It does have definitely a more presentation to it where it feels less like a tortured soul, though again, you could just imagine the stuff that would have been done to this poor character. It feels less like a tortured soul, and again, it feels closer to something more like a Cenobite. It has a really neat looking design, and probably something that I've said over the course of this review, a perfect drinking game I said she's very angelic. I still live by that. She's a very angelic looking figure. Very, very cool representation. I like how they would have made use of the skin to kind of give us these angel wings. And of course that buzzsaw blade through the top, serving as a halo, is just the icing on the cake. This gruesome cake, ends up being one really neat looking figure. Gruesome, yes. It's always going to be gruesome, but still a very cool figure nonetheless. Today's Spookerific review, we were continuing our looks at Clive Barker Tortured Souls Series 2, The Fallen. This was Camille Noire. If you guys haven't had a chance yet to subscribe to this channel, what are you waiting for? Hit that little subscribe button down below. You won't miss a beat when it comes to future videos. Of course, speaking of future videos, more future videos will be happening during the month of Spotober. Of course, we still have to finish the rest of the Tortured Souls Series 2. Yes, we are doing the Series 2. I know we already did Tortured Souls Series 1. As a treat from me to you, we're also going to be having a look at the Series 2, The Fallen, as well. As always, guys, thanks for watching, as you always do. I'll see you next time.